you ever dream of buried treasure, of lonely pirate coves, of maps with skull and crossbones? Treasure, they say, is where you find it. For it's not so much where you look, but how that counts. The whole universe is one vast, overflowing treasure chest. The greatest treasure hunt of all time had its beginning almost 400 years ago in the little Dutch village of Middelburg. For it was here that Jan Lippershey and Zacharias Janssen gave to the world the telescope and the microscope. It was Galileo who first turned the telescope toward the heavens and thus forged a tool which snapped the fetters that bound man to the earth and loosed him to roam the uncharted pathways of the heavens. The telescope grew rapidly in size and in importance in shaping the thinking of man. And through the passing years, man dreamed and built. And then dreamed again, and built yet again the giant of Palomar. The giant whose 500 tons of glass and steel is poised so delicately the hand of a child can move it on its course. The giant whose 200-inch eye stares unblinking into space to see 1 billion light years. Just what is a billion light years? Let's imagine a trip through space at the speed of sound, 760 miles per hour. At this speed, we could reach the moon in 12 days, 22 hours, and 48 minutes. To reach the sun would require 5,040 days, or almost 14 years. But to reach the nearest star, we must travel on day and night for 3,800,000 years. If we were to continue at this speed for another 75 billion years, we would come at last to the limits of our galactic system, or our universe. And from this vantage point, we would see in the depths of space beyond a tiny hazy object. Here we discard our jet plane for a beam of light and hurtle on through space 1,000,000 times faster than the speed of sound, 186,272 miles each second. And after traveling at the speed of light for 1,000,000 years more, we find ourselves in another universe, composed of 100 billion other stars. But this is just our next-door neighbor in space, the Andromeda Galaxy. These other galactic systems or universes seem to be quite similar to our own. They are all more or less spiral in shape, quite flat when seen from the edge. Their diameter is about 100,000 light years. And remember, 1 light year is almost 6 trillion miles. How many other universes are there? No man knows. There are at least 200 million of them just within the range of the Palomar telescope, each composed of 100 billion suns. The facts man discovered with the telescope left him overwhelmed by a sense of utter insignificance. The world, which had seemed so large, was now just a speck. And man, well, he was just a tiny microbe crawling on a speck of cosmic dust. One thing seemed certain. Man was far too small for God to care anything about. You know, partial knowledge can be a dangerous thing. If a man were to keep his eye glued to a telescope all the time, for example, he could get all sorts of weird ideas. For you see, the telescope gives us just half the picture. It is interesting to note that the telescope
and the microscope were born at the same time and in that same little Dutch village. For while Jan Lippershey was building the first telescope, Zacharias Janssen was creating the instrument which unlocked the fabulous treasure of little things. Thousands of years ago, Job asked, "Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow?" Treasures in snow? Yes, treasures of beauty. Art treasures, rare and priceless, yet free to all. The treasure of good, honest fun in an old-fashioned snow fight. But there are other treasures, too.
The warm sun shines again. The snow melts. Drop adds to drop, rivulet to rivulet, pouring into streams, tumbling, cascading down the mountainsides, hurrying to its destiny, to be channeled at last into irrigation systems, and then bubble forth to soak into the ground with all its life-giving wonder, and at the call of thirsty roots to rise again and erupt into a miracle of life. Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? That treasure which man may woo, but only God can give? God too busy to care for man? What logic is this when every day we see the miracle of his hand about us? Could it be that there is yet another treasure in that snow? A treasure hid from all but careful eyes, open only to patient seekers after truth? Yes, and it's worth more than all the gold and jewels of men. The snowflake. Here is the real treasure of the snow, hidden deep in the mystery of every tiny flake, the treasure of wisdom and understanding of our God. How many snowflakes on a mountainside? Man could not even name their number. God could have made them all the same, all a shapeless mass. Yet he chose to make them each a wonderful mystery, all perfect, all fashioned about the same basic six-sided pattern, and yet all different. Perhaps that he might reveal to man his infinite concern for little things. How could God care for man? How could he help but care?
Did you ever take a good look at a grain of salt?
That single grain is composed of billions upon billions of particles, so small that if we put 1,000,000 of them in a pile, we couldn't even see the pile, not even with a microscope. Now, put a drop of water on the grain of salt. Warm the slide just a bit. Something is happening to that grain of salt. We say it's dissolving. Millions of those tiny invisible particles are breaking away from the grain of salt and mixing with the molecules of water, so the salt grain just disappears. But now, as the slide is cooling, let's turn to a higher power. When the water cools just enough, scores of tiny little gems appear as from nowhere. Millions upon millions of invisible salt molecules join hands again to form microscopic crystals of salt. Treasure in the commonplace. With the microscope, the medicine chest becomes a treasure chest. each substance with its own jeweled magic. In that cough syrup, you may find turpin hydrate, which produces long, slender crystals that form at precise angles, which identify these crystals from all others. Your favorite eye wash probably contains zinc acetate, each crystalline substance producing its own characteristic crystal. Oxalic acid forms a tumbling jumble of microscopic jackstraws. Hydroquinone, a forest of shimmering needles. Most crystals are microscopic in size, but there are exceptions. Rock candy starts as invisible sugar molecules which build together to form microscopic sugar crystals. And then, if there is a constant supply of sugar molecules and a constant temperature, will grow almost indefinitely. You may have seen these giant sugar crystals in a jar of jelly that was left in a forgotten corner of your cellar shelf. An ample supply of molecules, even temperature, and centuries of time. These are the ingredients that have transformed the heart of the earth into a storehouse of endless treasure. Treasure that has drawn men as by a strong magnet into the dark recesses of the earth. Cave explorers, speleologists they're called, spelunkers if you know them well. Men for whom the call of strange adventure is loud and clear. Their search is not for gold, but for the elusive gem of knowledge. To be where man has never been before. To know the unknown. The grotesque figures which lend such eerie quality to limestone caves are formed by water. Not carved by tumbling torrents, but built quietly through the passing centuries by the steady dripping of water, saturated with dissolved limestone. While each shimmering drop hangs for a fleeting second, it evaporates imperceptibly, leaving behind a few tiny molecules. This action forms the stalactite from above. Similar action forms the stalagmite on the floor of the cave. Just as the crystals formed in that glass of jelly forgotten on the cellar shelf, so through the passing years, crystal formations of indescribable beauty and wonder have been building, molecule upon molecule, in the dark corridors of the earth. Some men climb to mountaintops. Some descend to hidden depths. But whether they reach up or down, they find the wonder-working hand of God has gone before. I'd like to share with you what to me is a wonderful experience. It's the growth of microscopic crystals under polarized light. Let's take a pinch of Trianol. Cover it with a cover slip, and then heat it until it melts into a thin film of liquid. And then watch that liquid under the microscope. chemicals, the crystals form very slowly. With others, they form almost instantly. And they are all different, because the invisible molecules are different. Each substance shows its own special form and beauty. The desert is a lonely place. God-forsaken, we sometimes say. A place of desolation and death. The old prospector has spent his life in these burning wastes in search of treasure, always hoping someday to strike it rich. And yet, day by day, he has trampled underfoot a priceless treasure he never dreamed was there. A treasure brought to light but recently by the careful searching eye of science. The microscopic flowers of the desert. Belly plants, they're somewhat inelegantly but quite appropriately called. For they are planned by God for big men. Men big enough to stoop low to marvel at God's care for little things. How do the tiny seeds of these delicate plants survive the blistering, parching heat of the summer's sun, the freezing cold of winter nights? How did they take root in the barren, shifting sands of the desert? It has been found that these almost invisible seeds will survive the rigors of the desert for 5 years or more, waiting just the right conditions necessary for their mysterious growth. By exploring the enigma of their growth in this strange environment, scientists hope to gain new knowledge, knowledge to aid man in his search to find new ways to feed a hungry world. God-forsaken? Not so long as myriads of wondrous plants lift their tiny heads to heaven in witness to God's care for little things. It doesn't seem possible that 150 years could have passed after the invention of the microscope before someone thought of looking inside a drop of water. After all, what could there be in water but water itself? The modern microscope is a far cry from early handmade instruments. But in retrospect, we can slip back through the years to the moment when Antony Leeuwenhoek first peered into a drop of water. With a trembling excitement, he realized that he had discovered a whole new world, a world of enormous littleness, with creatures that had lived, had reproduced, had battled, had died, completely unknown to all men from the beginning of time. To an unbelieving world, he announced his find, that there were tiny beasties, he called them, living in water, more of them in a single drop than there were people in all his native land. Many are one-celled organisms. That is, their entire body is made up of just one cell, a single highly complex cell that provides the functions of locomotion, assimilation of food, reproduction. One tiny cell that somehow harbors all the wondrous mystery of life. The amoeba, ghost of the microscopic world. For years, this fantastic one-celled creature has stirred the imagination of stolid men of science. It expands the cell wall in the direction it wishes to go, and then flows its eerie way through life. A tiny blob of protoplasm, somehow possessed of life. It shuns harmful chemicals, avoids strong light, and seeks food that will sustain its life. Protoplasm. Where in all the universes of space is there a mystery more inscrutable than life itself? We've had a little glimpse of what can exist in a single drop of water. But stop and think. There are 117,000 drops in a gallon. 1,100,000,000,000 gallons in a cubic mile. And there are 400 million cubic miles of water on the Earth. Scientists from the University of Southern California show keen interest in all life found in the sea. But none is more important than the microscopic plants and animals trapped in the gossamer web of a plankton net. For here again, the real treasure is in little things. Most of us are apt to think of microscopic life only in connection with fresh water. But a drop of seawater is even more prolific. The amount and variety of microscopic life in the sea is vast beyond all comprehension. This little fellow, who seems to be practicing a juggling act, lives in a hollow tube. When he decides to go someplace, he works his way carefully to the end of the tube, starts his outboard motor, and swims off, glass house and all. Even the microscopic world has its comedians. And these little fellows are just about as funny as they come. The floor of the ocean is the museum of the microscopic world. For it is here that countless billions of creatures that have lived and died have left a fabulous record of their existence. Just black, slimy mud. But the microscope reveals that it is composed almost entirely of minute particles of exquisite beauty. The creatures who once lived within the stately halls of these microscopic mansions built them from chemicals they found in the sea. Diatoms build their houses of silica, tiny houses of natural glass, so small and so perfect that they are used to test the quality of high-power microscope lenses. There are more than 10,000 varieties of diatoms, and each builds its house on a pattern different from any other. These are living diatoms. They are in all water, fresh or salt, but in the sea their abundance is unbelievable. When the diatom dies, the discarded house sinks to the floor of the ocean. Impossible though it may seem, this 100-foot cliff is composed almost entirely of diatoms. In one thimbleful of this diatomaceous earth, there are more than 14 million diatoms. How many diatoms in one scoop of a power shovel? If man should try to count them, numbers would lose all meaning. And remember, every one of them was once a living thing, an object of the Creator's care. This area was once covered by the waters of an inlet from the sea. Waters in which diatoms lived and reproduced in fantastic numbers. When they died, their tiny houses sank to the bottom, leaving a deposit of almost solid diatoms, 5 miles square and 1,400 feet deep. The God who can form a galaxy of 100 billion flaming suns and hurl it into space must be a God of infinite power. But a God who can create tiny living organisms and somehow endow them with the architectural genius and ability to fashion these microscopic mansions must be capable of infinite concern for little things.
We've been exploring the treasure house of the universe. Together, we've examined the very large and the very small. And I'm sure that the question has arisen in the minds of all of us, just where do we fit in? What is man's place in the eternal scheme of things? One answer to this question comes from a recent and a very startling discovery in the field of science. If we were to take the smallest object known to science, a subatomic particle, which is something of the order of a billionth of a trillionth of an inch in diameter, and place it at one end of a chart, and then take the largest object we know anything about, a stellar galaxy, like our own galaxy, and place it at the other end, we would find that a man of average size would be right in the center of that chart, exactly halfway between the infinitely large and the infinitely small. I suppose that a mathematician would say that man is the mean proportion in the universe. Does God care for man? The question seems just a little foolish now, doesn't it? Of course he cares. If God would stop caring, that moment we would stop living. But God's concern extends beyond just our breathing and the beating of our heart to the deepest need of our life. From the Bible, we find that God's greatest concern is our spiritual welfare for all eternity. And in the Bible also, we find that he has made ample and wonderful provision for all of us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. What is the greatest treasure in life? To know God, not just as creator of the universe, but as our personal Savior, our Heavenly Father. This priceless treasure is within your grasp if you'll just reach out the hand of faith and take it.